Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. I'm just going to give it a minute just to get everybody into the room. But I hope that everyone's having such a lovely day and welcome to CRIG 2024. I hope that your week started off really well and that you're ready to celebrate information literacy's 50th birthday. So 50 years ago, in 1974, Paul G. Tukowski, the founder and president of the Information Industry Association in the United States, coined the term information literacy. And so to celebrate this milestone, which is such a fundamental part of our work within the library and information sector, we decided to make it the theme of the 2024 CRIG seminar. My name is Ramona Naika, and I'm a scholarly services librarian at Deakin University and also the chair of the CRIG Seminar Committee. And I'm so excited to welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by Caval and the committee. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia where we live, learn and work. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strengths of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations peoples and communities. And we recognise their continuing connection to lands, waters, sky and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and I would also like to welcome and extend my respects to First Nations peoples attending today. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country today, and hopefully it's going to be a beautiful day, although I can't really see in this little room that I'm in. And I really encourage you all to please share which country you're attending from in the chat. A little bit of housekeeping. If you have any technical issues, any technical questions during the session, please type them into the chat and the Caval team will assist you with that. The chat is also a space to connect with others today, so you can share your reflections, share your thoughts, have a little chat on anything raised in the presentations. And at a virtual event like this, the digital chat really plays an amazing role as a connector and like thought stimulus. So please chat away. You can also engage with our content on social media, and we'll be using LinkedIn mostly and the hashtags CRIG 2024 and InfoLit50. So if you do post about anything today, please do tag us or pop the hashtags on. Some of you might be attending from viewing parties, which we've tried to encourage this year because after all, we're celebrating a big birthday. And there's a cake competition as well. So please submit your information literacy themed cakes to us. The winner will be crowned at the end of the seminar. And we've had a few sneak peeks via LinkedIn, so have a look at those as well. Today's session will comprise of two presentations, both with its own Q&A segment afterwards. So I'm going to shortly introduce our first one, while my committee colleague Marcus, who is, and brace yourselves, the copyright coordinator, the library academic integrity lead, and the liaison librarian at Federation University Library. So Marcus will be joining us halfway to introduce the second session. We're going to ensure that you get a short break between the two presentations to get yourself a cup of tea or to stretch. And if you have any questions for the speakers throughout the webinar, please submit them through the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your window, and we'll get to as many of those as possible after each presentation. Within the Q&A function as well, you can see other people's questions there. You can upvote questions, you can write comments to existing questions, so do engage that way as well if you'd like to. So I'm really excited to introduce our first presenter who's travelled from the United States as a Fulbright scholar with support from the Fulbright World Learning Programme. She's hosted in Australia by the Western Sydney University Library, in particular Paul Jewell, thank you Paul, and is around halfway through her whirlwind nationwide Project Information Literacy Tour. The next and final stop of the tour will be Brisbane on the 4th of November, and you can find out more information about that in the link that Sarah will pop in the chat for us. So the person that I'm talking about is Dr. Alison J. Head, who is an information scientist and social science researcher in the United States. She's the founder and director of Project Information Literacy, or PIL, which is a national research institute in the San Francisco Bay Area that investigates how people, including university students, conceptualize and operationalize research tasks for school, life, work, and more recently for engaging with news and information about climate change. Since 2008, PIL researchers have surveyed and interviewed over 27,000 Americans, including over 22,000 college students from more than 100 US institutions. Through 14 open access studies, PIL has explored how students and recent graduates use research skills for coursework, for everyday problem solving, and for news engagement. And in the year 2023-24, PIL is conducting a year-long study on how Americans form views on climate change in a divided nation. Alison has a PhD in Library and Information Science from the University of California at Berkeley, where she's also received her BA. She's held joint appointments as a research fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, the Library Innovation Lab at Harvard Law School, the Meta Lab at Harvard, as well as a visiting research scholar at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Purdue University, University of Pittsburgh, the University of Washington, and Stanford University. There are not enough hours in the day for all that. I have no idea how she does it. If you'd like to know more about the recent work of PIL, you can read their 2022 retrospective report, which we'll link to in the chat as well. So in this presentation, Alison will explore what PIL researchers have learned by studying research through the lens of the student experience. She'll present major findings from the 14 years of their PIL college study, including some surprises from PIL's fieldwork and data analysis about student information practices in a rapidly changing information landscape. So on behalf of everyone here today, I'd really like to extend the warmest of welcomes to Dr. Alison J. Head. Thank you so much, Alison, and over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alison Head. Really pleased to be here. We're broadcasting from Western Sydney University this morning with the help of Paul Jewell and Todd Hillsley. I want to call out and shout out a thanks to them for organizing this tour. So what I'd like to do is Paul's adjusting the screen here. I'm good to go. And I want to advance. I'm working on a Dell. Let's see. Uh-oh, we're having a technical issue. I can't get very far. Hold on here. Okay, what are you doing? Okay, good. Okay, great. Okay, we're set up. I'm driving. First of all, let me introduce you to Project Information Literacy. How I came at this is I was a professor for 25 years in new media, and I became more and more curious about how students used the internet for fulfilling course research assignments, as well as in their everyday life. The call of the study, which began 16 years ago when I founded it, and I've always directed it, the call of the study was, what's it like to be a student in the digital age? And we'll talk about the chapters that we've done research in that area. But to give you an overall view of what PIL is, if you haven't heard of it, is we use social science research methods, mixed methods, with large samples across the US at institutions, four-year institutions, as well as two-year institutions, all over the US, public and private schools. And we use an info-lit lens to tell that story. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today, some of those findings. We have 250 colleges and universities in our sample, a volunteer sample, that we call upon when we get funding. People think we're huge. We're not. We do huge projects, but we work in small teams. We're geographically dispersed, which really gives us access to some of the leading data scientists, librarians, and information science researchers, and computer science in the US. So that's worked well for us. I've held appointments at University of Washington as a research scientist where this project started. And then the project actually moved to Harvard, where I was a research scholar and lots of other things, as you can see, because they were interested in students and how they conducted research and what we often say, solve information problems. We made PIL a nonprofit in 2013 and made it a research institute as our research continued. So large projects, small teams, geographically dispersed. And it takes us realistically, any of these studies, it takes us about a year to complete it. By the time we go through the review boards to be able to interview or use focus groups with students, which is how we collect data or administer surveys, to look at students' research behaviors. So this has been going on for quite a while. And it's longitudinal in the sense, if you like research, it's longitudinal in the sense that it's the same demographic of college students between the years of 18 and who knows, 28. So lots of different ages here, sometimes younger students. Here's a timeline. This is a look at PIL over the last 16 years. This will make sense when I talk about this presentation, when I talk about the 5 research takeaways. We have 3 chapters of PIL research that follow really how the internet has developed as a rapidly changing networked space over time in some of the most critical years. In that sense, PIL was lucky to start doing the research when we did our first study, started collecting data in 2008. But our first study, all of these are open access, by the way, as well as the research tools, the interview protocols, the survey instruments, they're all open access. You can use them, just cite us. You can change them for your own ongoing research, and people do regularly and build on our findings. But since 2008, we been doing research around how students find information, evaluate information, make critical transitions in their life. We call these information transitions, and then deal with this last chapter, the zeitgeist studies, the problems of the day, things like algorithms, COVID information, and how they interact with news. And then most recently, climate change. So we've looked at a number of very vexing problems that have occurred in the information space in these 3 chapters. The first chapter, and some of the findings will come from that when we were first in the field collecting data, and have followed that thread throughout our research. The first chapter is really, depending on how old you are, you remember when the web was really a read-write medium, and you went out and found information. That transition started to change once there were algorithms and information came to you and information found you, news found you, which come up in our zeitgeist finding. So this snapshot is a good overview of where we've done research at a time of critical change. There isn't tracking in the earlier studies of students. Google's first developing its model of tracking. Wikipedia is coming into its own. Vendors like ProQuest are looking at their interface and how scholarly research databases are used, and end up coming up with a search protocol where it's just a screen with a search field for students to fill in, and faculty and anybody, as a way to kind of Googleize course-related research. These are the early problems that are happening. I'll just say a couple of things for each one of these chapters. In the second chapter, I love these studies. I did these when I first was at Harvard, because at the Berkman, it was a group of internet researchers, only 12 of us with different backgrounds. And these questions became important to all of us, which is, how do people make information transitions in their life at critical times? And this was federally funded. We looked at how students in particular graduate from university and join the workplace. What information skills do they take with them? Why are they hired? And where do they fall short, and how do they get retrained for workplace information literacy? It's a big breakthrough study for the field. We looked at a number of different organizations and companies, Smithsonian in the US, Microsoft, Nationwide Insurance. Still one of my favorite studies, and that was in 2012. The other study we did about information transitions was something that we heard from librarians a lot. How do students come to us? How do we get them? And this was the 2013 first year experience study, that transition from doing maybe a university, doing a regular research paper, to all of a sudden being in a university. How does that happen? What are the challenges of moving from high school to a university environment? And I have a slide that speaks to those findings, so I won't go into it. And then a question I've always had as a professor, and we'll touch on this, and I think librarians have it as well, information and instruction librarians in particular, which is what happens after college? What do students take with them from the university experience, especially as information seekers? And then these last studies are really the questions of the day, as I've said, the burning issues of fake news, misinformation, conspiracy theories, so many different questions that jeopardize our trust, which brings me to our very last study, which is the climate change study that has looked at not what people know, not what people, we did general public as well as students, what people in a divided America, not what they know about climate change, but how they find news and information about climate change. So we took a very broad topic and then looked at climate change using an information literacy lens to ask the question of, what's the information seeking like? How does it vary? How do students as well as general public from 18 or from 16 to 85 was our sample. How do they find their information? What are their information worlds? When information was out there in the beginning, that was one question in our earlier studies, but the climate change study really became a culmination of so much of our work because information is inside here as well as outside there. And how do people find out about climate change, especially is America as divided, and what is the willingness to take action? Okay, so here's 5 research takeaways. We have a lot. It took me a long time to prep for this presentation, so hopefully I can answer your questions. The retrospective that was on the previous slide that came out in 2020, actually is a good overview. You might want to look at that. That came out and it came out in 2022, does an overview of PIL's research. It's only about 15 pages long. We also did, as part of that, and this brings it relevant to you and may resonate, we also asked the question, what's our impact been? And so we did a citation analysis of about 2,500 citations around the world of researchers, perhaps people like you, conducting research in a number of different fields and citing PIL as a source. And we found, when we did a geographic breakdown of that, the countries that cited our work most were Canada as well as Australia. So there is a definite tie-in here. Let's talk about the takeaways. The first takeaway is, I love this finding. We go out in the field. This has been consistent throughout our research. This is a thread from our research, and I would say it's a key takeaway. And that is when we start interviewing students way back in 2009 and 2010, and then continue asking this question throughout our research. Students, and that's university students, undergrads, they say research is more difficult than ever before. This comes out and when PIL's young and they say, why? We've collected adjectives here. We often do this. We ask this in the climate change study as well. When you get a research assignment for a paper, usually a 5-page paper in the US, what's called an argument paper as an undergrad, in any major, when you get this kind of paper, particularly in social science and humanities, what adjective comes to mind? How are you really feeling? Let's take the pulse here. And this was done in focus groups, and then we did follow it up with a survey as well. And what we found is students had a whole bunch of adjectives. Most of them aren't good, but one stands out that's in the blue-gray there, which is excited. That students are excited about research, yet they're overwhelmed. I love when you're a researcher and you're out in the field and you get a pair of adjectives that are totally opposite from one another. There's a story there and more questions to ask. This comes from our first year experience study, the one that I was talking about that was done in 2013. It's old. It'd be interesting if somebody redid it. I think it's still applicable, though, the main themes of this, the trends. That is a high school library, if you're lucky enough to still have school librarians and a high school librarian, is a totally different space than a university library. And working with academic librarians, which many of you are on your campus. In our study, looking back, I tracked back to the high schools to compare to do a comparative analysis of high school libraries with college libraries and academic libraries in our sample in the freshman study. And there were quite a few schools participating. And what I found is students that took our survey for the freshman study, as we came to call it, and it ended up having, we ended up using first year experiences and focus groups from 6 US schools and many more high schools. But you find the distinction here. The comparison is when you come to uni, there are 16 times more librarians and there were specialists. And that was very foreign to incoming freshmen at an academic institution. Also, library collections, there's 9 times more resources. And I'm talking about books and reports and things on the shelf. This, of course, has been disappearing in library design. But at the time we did the study, the collections themselves were much larger in an academic library. This is pretty overwhelming. And there are probably the key finding here, there are 19 times more library databases. There's a distinction here that I think is worth noting. In interviewing one of the newly admitted college students at Harvard, our elite institution in the US, a student told me the following story. She said, you know, we had ProQuest at my high school, but it was, quote unquote, the training wheels model. It's nothing like I use here at Harvard and use in the library. There are so many different advanced features. It's a much different interface, how it looks, and of course, the access to information. So navigating that new space in college is, as we call it, we lump college and university together in the States. But navigating that new space is really problematic for students. And that's why research is overwhelming. There's just so much information to deal with. As one student summed it up, I love what I do because students sum it up better than I ever could sometimes. The more you know, the less you know. That distinction, that comment about I'm overwhelmed and excited. Often students in their first year are really excited to be cut loose and be able to research any topic that they want, as opposed to when they were in high school and being assigned a topic. And here's a key distinction, assigned a topic with the task for research in high school of finding the answer. I think quick and dirty, if you remember anything from the topic, finding the answer is something you really need to understand about students in the States, at least, that drives their information-seeking behavior, especially for course research, but also for everyday life as well. So that experience shapes how they do research. A lot to say from the freshman study, but I'll move along because of time here. Students have the most difficulty getting started on assignments. Now, cynics in the group have said, that have read these findings, have said, well, that's because they're procrastinators. They may wait 2, 3, 4 days. We've asked that question as well through the years. But what we found, what was particularly difficult, and again, for your field, this is really, I think, a fascinating finding. It comes down to task definition. What is that under the hood? In our scale here in the 2010 study, which is still our most cited study, funded by the MacArthur Foundation. Task definition is choosing a topic and narrowing it down and delineating those boundaries of the inquiry. And that is really problematic to students. And I love this quote from a student out in the field who said, "What if I choose a topic that fails me?" Now that's kind of has a double meaning. They did not mean fail the class. They meant doesn't go far enough. I can't get 5 pages out of it, or it's too much and I can't narrow it down. So the task definition is almost well, it's less than 3/4 of the sample, certainly a majority of where the problems begin for students. And that is at the beginning. If you think librarians, when we came out with this finding, were really stunned by it and thought, what are we doing with reference? What are we doing with intervention? When we talk to students, where do we start in the process? Do we say, what are you interested, tapping into the excitement that they often feel? What are you interested in looking at? How could you look at this particular problem? How could we get started? And that changed in the States a lot of the way information literacy and instruction occurred, as well as reference work with peer reference, training from students, as well as one-on-one reference and expert reference from academic libraries. Search, again, and I spoke to this, is often problematic because you're using different tools. The other thing, and I've been asked to speak a lot about this, I'm doing 6 keynotes in 3 weeks, and you're my 5th keynote. And I've been asked a lot about this so far around the search question and where do students have problems with search and what tools do they use? But what I've been asked, to your credit in Australia, is how can we widen the lens, is what we call it in the retrospective, and include more resources than scholarly research databases that students are required to get for argument papers and writing those papers. What about news? What about blogs? We found blogs, for instance, when we looked at everyday life research, changing my hat over here. When we looked at everyday life research, we found out blogs were an incredible resource for recent grads grappling with things like setting up a budget, figuring out how to ask for a raise at work. And why? Why would blogs, something that we often think is old-fashioned, why would they matter to students that have recently graduated and are no longer in university? It was because they could see the comments and how a solution worked out over time. So that's a really surprise resource and was a surprise finding about everyday life research. Using information is applying this. And if this interests you, I wrote a provocation series essay at PIL that's up on the site under publications. We called this a series of provocations. They weren't research projects. We didn't get funding, but we thought there was a story to tell. And I wrote a provocation essay on reading and the issue of reading and applying information in a university setting. Again, if you're looking for the answer in high school, you're not going to use information the same way that you're expected to use it in university. Often in high school, you have a single source. In university, with academic assignments, as you know, you pull from multiple sources, talk about widening the lens, but I think the skill here is also the ability to cross-contextualize. Or as one student said, the real problem with reading in university, something in the States that doesn't get a lot of attention, is tying it all together. I just can't do it because the writing styles are different. I read a scholarly research paper, and then I might read a book, and then I might read a news story. And it may be about something like the referendum, something that's complex in this country. How do I pull it all together to make my argument? Then the last is self-assessment. Did I do a good job? I love this finding because it comes up again as a theme in our workplace study when we find that this is a real letdown when students, recent grads, enter the workplace, they find that they have a task that involves research. And the first thing is teams can change. And that doesn't happen in the classroom. You don't come to the classroom or the virtual classroom the next week and it's a whole different set of students. So that threw recent graduates tremendously when they entered the workplace and thought of information seeking. But the big thing was self-assessment. And nobody tells me whether I've answered the question and done a good job in the workplace with a research assignment. So it's this unfulfilling, how do I learn in the workplace? And that really vexed students in our workplace study, the recent grads, excuse me. Oops. Oh, operational problems here. Okay. How can I unpack this? And this has been a huge focus of PIL's research throughout our 14 studies. Where do the problems occur? I wondered as a professor and a teaching professor at both public and private institutions, why is research so hard for students? And I often thought as a lecturer, as a professor, that context, if I could say a concept a number of different ways, that it would sink in and reach students. And that much I knew as a professor with pedagogy. For instance, if I was talking about immigration, I needed to talk about the experience where I live in California of Hispanics, but I also needed to talk about the complications of traveling, the complications of crime, the complications of perhaps lived experience in the classroom that my students had. So context, that much I knew coming in when I first started this project. But through our research and working on this project, I developed a typology with my team about the different questions that students were trying to answer, whether it was course research or everyday life research. And these questions came up over and over again. So this is a typology of the college information seeking practices for fulfilling course as well as everyday life. This typology is really a typology for solving information problems, whether that's a course assignment that you need to get done next week, or whether that's you need to figure out how to purchase an item or do research on healthcare for yourself or a condition or a parent or a family member. So these are also where the frustrations begin. If I can use this typology in my own teaching and also with it can push the information literacy field forward if we have an idea of where complications occur. The first complication is finding big picture context, which comes back to my earlier comment about getting started. And the student who said to me, what if I choose a topic that fails me? In other words, I choose a topic that's not big enough or that it's not small enough. How often does that come up? I'd say throughout our research that these needs occur over and over again, and that big picture probably comes up the most. Wikipedia was a tremendous resource for helping with big picture context. Not only did it give citations, which a lot of librarians know, and good citations usually, Wikipedia also, and I love this, the student that worries about a topic that would fail them, Wikipedia also scopes a topic. If you get a result that's only a paragraph long, that is going to be a topic that is too narrow, and it may not fulfill a 5-page paper that you're writing. So students used it to scope out the size, the scale of the research question they were trying to fulfill. Legalizing marijuana goes on and on in the US or on Wikipedia in general. Then there's little teeny topics that just really aren't defined, like doom scrolling probably doesn't have that much in Wikipedia. The second is in this typology is information gathering. And that is around widening the lens. Where do I look for information? This is kind of a frightening finding from our research around faculty. And that is when we looked at 191 research handouts. You're in class, I did this regularly, the professor says, you're going to do a research assignment and write a research paper. It's usually a paper. It's about 80% papers, and that hasn't changed. You might do a video in other classes or an oral presentation, but for the most part, it's a writing assignment. And the information gathering around the writing assignment, how do faculty guide students? Well, it was over half the research. It was 7 in 10, half the research, more than half, 7 in 10 of the research assignments, these pieces of paper or virtually posted. Here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to grade it, and here's what it's going to do. Of the 191 handouts, 7 out of 10 told students to look for information on the library shelf, a book, a place-based resource. And that's an amazing finding if you think about it. Not online, not an ebook, but a physical book on the shelf. And that was 7 out of 10. That was a surprise finding. I think it's a window on how so many faculty, certainly not new faculty or younger faculty, but how they assign research to students. They also don't bring up what research is. The other thing, going with that a little bit farther, one of the challenges about being an undergrad is taking so many of the general requirements in those first couple of years in the States and learning the language of the field. I remember this was particularly confusing, which is my third part of my typology, that every field had its own language. I mean, anthropologists talked about subcultures, they used ethnography. Then I could take a related course in sociology, and I had a whole different language. And if I took humanities, I might have a close reading and a critical reading of a text, and the whole issue with the core text, and should we read these classics or not? All these fields have their own language, but they have their own focus as well. And this is in a university setting, you're getting experts to teach you. So this is very disorienting. And I've only gone through 3 of the contexts. The last one is situational, which is how can I, if I'm the student, the context I always have is, how can I fulfill this assignment, get it done, and pass this class? That's primary. And when we asked students in 2010, what is your goal with fulfilling a course assignment? What goes through your head? These primary goals of finishing the assignment, getting it done, passing, were higher than the others. But 70% said, I really want to learn something new. So this sometimes comes up. If we look at information, everyday life information, the things that come up in your life, not necessarily movies, but things like purchasing something, because that's an expense and there's risk. And also things like health questions came up a lot, which I mentioned before. The situational context that was so hard in that particular set of information seeking was knowing when you were done, and also sorting through all the information that could possibly help you with an answer. What was good information in everyday life research questions? There's a paper that we posted, it's up on the site in our articles that we wrote for First Monday about everyday life research, where students went and how it's different than course-related research. It's critically important. Sometimes it's tossed off as not that important, but actually students say that they often say that everyday life research has much, much higher risks than their course assignments. So keep that in mind. I love this. This is one of my favorite quotes ever from a student. This became kind of viral among librarians, which is, Wikipedia is my pre-search tool. And this is at the beginning there about big picture context. How do you get big picture context? Before I start doing, as one student said, serious research, before I really start diving in and perhaps looking at a research article or thinking more seriously about a topic, a course reading, or a Google search or Google Scholar, I'm going to look at Wikipedia. And as another student said, when I said, what's your first step of the research process in a focus group? And one student said this, but another student in a different focus group said, Wikipedia is my 0.05 step in the research process. They never report it, they never talk about it, but it resolves these questions around these contexts. So when you start thinking about the complexities, well, what strategies do they develop? What workarounds? What's their approach? Beyond what we're teaching, beyond what they're learning, and beyond what they're bringing with them. Here's Oliver. This is the quick and dirty answer. I think students over and over again, from the data that we've collected, almost from 10,000 students, like three things. And this is held true up until today as well throughout the project. Students, and I think people in general, like information that's current, convenient, and credible. And credible, of course, through the life of PIL has become a more difficult question, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Convenient, I think this is really interesting in looking at the everyday life research. When we asked about what's your first step, a student in that study said, I know it sounds really bad to say this. And I love when students say that, then I'm even more curious. I know it sounds really bad to say this, but if I have a question and I have my computer in front of me and my mate sitting next to me, I'm going to look on my computer first. And this applies to the workplace. We find that students and young people that we've studied in particular will go online to answer a question as opposed to talking in the workplace study to a coworker who may have more experience in the organization and a better idea of how the organization's needs and strategies have changed over time and what their focus is. So this can be a shortcoming to go computer first, as we know, but I think that's such a revealing quote from the field. If you do this, and we've asked this question and looked at the validity, and I do think research is asking good questions, but it's a bit of luck, isn't it? And what we found when I first wrote this up was most students use a small compass to conduct course-related research as well as everyday life. But let's talk about course-related research here. And they go to course readings first. Let me stop for a minute. This was really controversial when PIL published this report. We're open access, so everybody's reading these reports. We come out once a year. The reports are written in a readable style, and they're from a sample of students across the country. So we've got a lot of traction here. And it comes up that students in this study from 25 US schools, from Harvard to community colleges to big publics like Michigan, we're finding that most students, there's a commonality here, there's a thread, they go to course readings. Why? Because they've been sanctioned by the professor. There's this tremendous belief, whether it applies or not, that professors really understand the research process as well as the assignment and how to tackle it in a broader sense. And so, again, you hear so much in the field. One of my favorite stories about this is, I know if I go to office hours, the professor has a book in there and they can just give me the book, or they can give me an article or give me a link, and that's how I'll write the paper. Again, answer-centric, driven by finding the answer. Of course, these are the big five here over on the left side on the path that most students use to conduct course-related research, whether you like it or not. Google. And why Google? Be careful of what you say as a librarian or a professor in class, because students are listening so closely, they'll type in the phrase you're using to rephrase what they're looking for, because they're trying to get at the language and they're trying to get more information and the right sources. Library databases come after that, as students call them, scholarly research databases, academic search, others that students use over and over again. And it's mainly after they've kind of scoped the problem and feel like they're on solid ground. Then instructors. Here instructors come up again. I have another slide, the next slide, that looks at how instructors come up in the process and why. Wikipedia, not only the citations, remember to kind of scope the size of the research that's available that they think. It kind of allows them to cheat it, to get my research topic at 30,000 feet view. Government sites, trusted information, and then classmates. Research is fundamentally social. So who are their go-to experts? If research is social, where do students turn? I'm sad to report 83% in our sample turn to instructors. Do they have the expertise? I would say over time, what's the big change? I think instructors are losing authority more and more, especially around algorithms and algorithmic literacy and knowing how meaning occurs in society. Not all professors, but I think so many have been trained so long ago that they approach research a certain way that's very different than librarians that are two things: flexible and disciplinarily agnostic. They can work across fields and the language. Classmates is more than half here. What do you think of this topic? Do you know anybody that's done it? Will it work? Kind of a shortcut. And then librarians, sadly enough, is 30%. This is a key thing to remember about your field and about working with students. There are different goals here. Librarians really like to search. They like the idea of mutable inquiry. As a friend of mine at Harvard, the head of reference, used to say, it's really about mutable inquiry and organic processing, going back and forth. Students want to find. They're really looking for those answers. They want to fulfill the assignment. Most information, here's good news. Most information skills evolve and improve over time. Let's take a look at this. The first year, they discovered journal abstracts. As one student in the freshman study said to me, wow, I can't believe it. It's all there. It's like a little tiny Sparks note, and I can decide if I want it or not. It almost felt illicit to this student, and I found that so amusing. They start using Google Scholar. As one student said, it's just a tab away. And it's the same interface. Don't forget or neglect the complexity of the interface in the ProQuest training wheel versus ProQuest in academic settings. That comment from earlier. As they go on and specialize in a major, citation trail, of course, becomes important, and learning evaluation, which they do over and over again, and ethical issues. The takeaways from university, one of my key findings here is, watch this slide closely. These are what information skills, and this is a complex scale that appears in our 2015 study of recent grads. What takeaways about using information did you take from university? And then we look at individual majors as well. I looked at students, 3/4 say, I know how to evaluate information. This is so good on librarians. I gotta do a huge shout out. Librarians K through 20 and instructors many instructors have made evaluation a public habit. And we found that it's a practice habit. And we found that in the climate change study, students would find news about climate change and still check the veracity. They are trained in this, and this is an important step. So this is a huge win. This is good news from our findings. They know how to apply information. For instance, business school students did exceptionally well with, I do PowerPoint. I can present information. And search, this is self-report. But this last one, search, I would contend, most people can search. But they learn some of the finer points of searching, like Boolean searching, from college. This last one is concerning. Asking their own questions. Only 27% of the sample, and that's recent grads. It's 1,651 recent grads from 10 schools. This is a federal study several years ago. They have said, I really can't ask questions of my own. And that's really a concern that higher ed is not allowing for that. Yes, students can ask questions about when is it due? How will I get graded? What do I need to fulfill my major? But the deeper questions, the mutable inquiry questions, are problematic. They also feel there's not enough time in their exchanges with professors in classes, in big lectures, or just that it doesn't come up. Liberal arts institutions in the US are better than public, but not that much better. Last slide. Finishing up here, and I want to see what you're listening, and you maybe have some questions as well. These are takeaways. Defining a topic's difficult. Well, what do you do over on your side? I think you have to integrate curiosity into the research process. And if you think the first step of research is difficult, why not start that exchange by saying, what do you know? Why does this topic excite you? Thinking back to that earlier finding with the different adjectives. In other words, leveraging personal agency. We ended up writing a piece in the Lead Pipe that appears, it's also on our site. We published quite a bit. And the Lead Pipe piece talks about dismantling evaluation beyond craft, beyond Mike Caulfield and SIFT. How can we begin evaluation by asking students, what do you think? Is this a good resource or not? And then the process comes secondly. The second is here in the kind of the wrap up is this small compass syndrome. And where students really, we need to widen the lens. Assignments need to widen the lens. What students use, I mean, if you think back to students thinking, I want it convenient and current, what news sources should they use? Should they use ProPublica? Should they use The Guardian? You probably have resources in mind as well. I'm really enthused by this last takeaway, which is I think students over time in my research, it shows that they're getting better at critical thinking. I love this from the climate change study, that tone is a valid criteria. No, it's not really one of our standards. It's not in the ACRL framework, but it comes up over and over again as really kind of an aggregated version of all the different things that we're teaching students as far as evaluating credibility and the legitimacy of information. Does it feel right? You have to put yourself in students' shoes, and that's what we've learned. Thank you so much. I think students really do need to be encouraged to ask questions of their own.
It's going to change the settings for you.
Okay. Oh, my tech support's here, ever ready. This is Todd. We'll open it up to some questions that hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to take. Thank you again for attending, and thank you for listening. Eager to see what you have to say. It's always strange in a webinar. I've seen none of your reactions, so hopefully it has resonated with you. There's something for everybody here, maybe?
There's definitely been a lot of chat in the chat, so we've been all discussing your presentation. So first of all, thank you so much, and that was incredibly enlightening. We do have some questions for you as well, so I'll just jump into those so we can get to as many as them before we go for a break. I'm going to start with participants able to upvote the chat questions. I'm going to start with the one that has had the most upvotes. So I'll just read it out. Thank you for sharing your insightful research, Alison. Australia has one of the most privatised secondary school systems. One implication is increasing differences between well-resourced elite private schools with large libraries and teams of teacher librarians versus underfunded public schools with no teacher librarians and or no libraries at all. Are you observing this trend internationally, and what information literacy challenges does this present to us in universities?
That's a great question, and I think we have it in the US as well, that what concerns me most, and that's in the reading essay that I wrote in the provocation series, but it's also with the actual activity of research, that students are expected at so many institutions to be at the same skill set. And they don't have access, exactly what you're speaking to, and we certainly have it in the US, to the same resources. It's not a level playing field. They get into an elite, or they get into a public institution where they have a consortium and all these resources are available. So it doesn't matter if they go to the town over. Through these consortiums, they have all these resources they don't know how to use, but they're expected to use. I think that's a particular problem. In the freshman study, I was really taken with this, and I consider myself a methodologist, and we try to do the most rigorous research, and we do have recommendations at the end of each report for how to move forward, which may be worth looking at for you. I was really concerned when we did the freshman study, which I called, we did a breakout on myths about the research process, which fascinated me, especially coming at this from a professor's point of view. What myths did students carry with them about what was being asked of them to do, as well as use libraries? And I found, to your point in your question, which is a very good one, I found that it was students new to the research process that came from these settings that were really not the elite high schools. In other words, the rest of them that were really struggling with the research process. And one student, a farm worker whose parents worked in the wine industry, picking grapes, in where I came from in Sonoma County, I said, she's in a special program which helped, and she's starting, her parents have a 6th grade education. It's not happening at home that she's getting any sort of coaching. We're talking about the research process. And I said, what about the reference over there? It's at a community college. And I said, what about the reference? Do you ever use it? And she said, oh, no, that's for people that got in with a special, well, they weren't very smart. And so they got into this institution and into this college, and that's help for them. So I never can stand in the reference line because everybody would know I need help, like all my friends in the room. And that kind of, to get at the myths and to dispel those myths, I think is also another interesting starting point. What are students thinking about the shop that you're setting up and presenting to them? You can do tours, but one of the biggest confusions students over and over again is, where do I ask questions? And as librarians get younger and younger, who's a librarian? And if you go to a place like Harvard and say, don't you think you should wear a t-shirt that says librarian? Are you kidding? They're not wearing a t-shirt at Harvard that says reference librarian. So students will talk about these elaborate processes of, I don't know how to navigate this space. And there needs to be work done for students bringing in that acculturation process, where students will, if you look at the layout, we've done library space studies too. Sometimes I feel like we've done every angle of the whole student experience. But the way libraries are laid out, so many libraries on campuses are laid out where you walk in and circulation is there. And references a floor beneath or far away. And that's a really different model than you would get in high school, with a librarian there that was usually a jack of all trades that checked out books and also could help you find resources. So I think the space itself is horribly confusing, especially from students coming from these, I don't want to say lesser high schools, but they're lesser in terms of the resources and the training that they have. And they are expected just to get up to speed on their own.
Thank you so much, Alison. Another question that we have is we've been discussing the move towards natural language searches in databases, as well as AI assistance in databases, and trying to work out if providing training students to use Boolean logic is still relevant. And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm not a search expert, and there certainly are them. So I won't go into the nitty-gritty of search. I certainly saw search change in the beginning. ProQuest actually approached us and said, will you just do a research project about what we need to do to reach students? I said, well, that's really not what we do. But I think search needs to evolve. I think Boolean is a difficult, it's effective. I still use it, but I think it has limitations as well. But I would agree. I think natural language search, I've been asked a lot about AI by everybody, everywhere I go. I'm concerned the role of librarians in AI. I mean, we face the same issue with algorithmic literacy. We found that students were more up to speed about algorithms shaping their responses, not at university and not in the results they got, but in terms of searches they do for products and things in their everyday life. So we had kind of a preview of that, of how the information landscape is changing and what students could do. And I think it's was severely short-sighted that algorithmic literacy, which librarians have picked up more on, of how do you make yourself more aware? What strategies? We found strategies students applied in that study were like, get a VPN. They were pretty basic. And I think librarians have a lot more to say about algorithms as well as AI. And also, it has great potential for conducting course research as far as what did you find? What did AI find? It's another source in the room, isn't it? That's beyond all the ethical issues. That's a separate lecture, but I certainly could do that one as well.
So, during the presentation, you gave some great quotes from students. The more you know, the less you know. Fantastic. And also, Wikipedia is my pre-search tool.
I know everybody loves that. It became viral. It was like chosen as the phrase of the year by academic librarians. I love what I do. You really get an insider view. I'll say one thing, and I said this yesterday at the symposium here. It's really fun to do what I do and go in and at a different university and say, I want to talk to you about research. They have no idea who you are, except that you've gone through review boards. And then you say, you're never going to see me again. And there's just this, and I'm never going to tell your professors that I was here. I'm just going to take the information. I'm going to blend it all together and write a big paper. And students love that because they really let loose about how faculty know nothing about algorithms. I mean, it is that slide of faculty losing authority, which I think librarians could move in and raise that 30%. Okay, I just had to get my 2 cents in.
So so the Wikipedia being a pre-search tool, and in the chat while you were presenting, we were talking about Gen AI and how that might change things, in terms of maybe where students go first. Right now, you said it's course readings, etc. But how much do you see that changing to include AI? Is that something that you're going to investigate in the future, or actually?
It is. My team is chomping at the bit. What's the next study? What are we going to do here? We usually release a study, and then this has been a very useful tour because we listen to librarians and also educators, but mainly librarians. What other questions do you have? Certainly everybody has questions about AI. Stephen Jeffrey on our project is actually teaching a course at Northeastern on AI and its uses this semester, so we're watching that closely about students. We are, since we're multi-university in our sample and have all those schools, and I know them, I probably drive them nuts, but since I know them, I can call and say, we have questions about AI, and this is what we're wanting to ask. Can we come and talk to some of your students? So we pilot like where we're going and what we'll find. And with the algorithms study, I was concerned that Well, students know what algorithms are. And so you kind of blink and say, let's do a focus group somewhere that's a pilot. So that's often how we refine our questions and what we're going to ask. But I'm not avoiding your question. I don't know the AI study. However, we played with it, and I usually play with it, and we tease it as a team in our survey. And in the survey for climate change, which is up on the site, we did a survey with students at 9 schools, and the sample was over 1,500. And with those students, we asked, and this was just earlier this year, to find out about climate change and how you keep up. It's a whole list of resources that are part of their information worlds in our report. We did include AI and, Chat GPT. I look in Chat GPT for something. It was only 1%. Okay, that's 11 months ago. Things have changed. If I could do something, and I don't want to apply for funding, please don't make me do that. But if I could do something, and I always apply for funding and have for many years, and they know me as well, I would redo our 2010 study and, just like you're saying, update it. And update it with some AI specific questions, almost like we did in 2010 with Wikipedia. And then it became the seminal study on Wikipedia. And the First Monday piece that we wrote had 6,000 people that read it in a day. So the interest is there. I have a journalism background, so I'm not sure how this sits with other researchers, but I like my research to be a good story and to hold my interest. We talk about PIL, highly collaborative, small teams, blending journalism with scholarly research. So we're always on deadline. We're always thinking about how information is presented, who will read it. We spend more time. I think the climate change report that's up on the site, maybe we had 30 different drafts. I mean, we're big on rewriting and coming at these questions. I feel tremendously responsible what I put out into the world and how people make decisions. But yeah, what is the AI study? As I said, I'm a methodologist. I can't just do a straight survey. So I need to really think about how we would approach that. Who would fund it? And when we do it, because it's like the Wikipedia question, you got to intervene at the right time. People would read it. So we often say, or I do to my team, what's the sexy question? What are we all asking? Oh, my time is done here.
Well, we've got less than a minute left, but just to
Okay.
answer,
But
last
I was
question.
asked yesterday, and that's a good question. We really like the
well,
research. What are you going to do next? And after 16
well,
years, it's kind of like, phew, can I take Christmas off this year? Okay.
Well, the last question, which I think you've already kind of answered, is there an area that PIL has previously researched that you'll be interested in
2010,
revisiting?
hands down.
Yeah, absolutely.
My team scares me because we're close. We've worked together for years. They've gotten PhDs, they've had children, they've raised their family, they've gotten many different jobs. All these different things have happened at PIL through the years. We're very bonded, but I was talking to one of our researchers, Kirsten, who did the slides, who everybody loves those slides. But I said, what about redoing the 2010 study? And there was a pause, and she said, I'm in. And I said, you have 2 children under 3. She said, let's do it. And that probably would be, I think, the most interesting move. I think my friends and people in my personal life will kill me if I do another PIL study, because they are really time consuming, and then they're really exciting, and it's all I want to talk about.
Well, Dr. Head, thank you so much. Very much looking forward to your revisiting of the 2010 study. Thank you so much for your time today, for preparing and for presenting, and also answering questions from the audience. So we're now going to go to a 5-minute break, and then my colleague Marcus will welcome you back to the session at 11:16, we'll say.
Thank you.
So that's
my pleasure.
No worries. Thank you so much, Alison. So see you back here at 11:16 or 10:16 for anyone from the Sunshine State.
Thank you all for coming back, and I hope everyone's had a time to kind of stretch their legs and grab a cup of tea or something like that. 2 things about the what's coming up. Everyone's kind of familiar with the question and answer function of the of Zoom, please put in your questions and upvote those ones that you would like to sort of have Nilupa and Jason answer. Second thing is this presentation, I'm sure, is going to be very engaging and very thought-provoking for all our participants today. However, it is going to take us over some challenging terrain. So please look after yourselves. If you do feel you need to step away from the presentation, please do so. Look after yourselves. There are some resources on the screen if you do need to sort of process what we're going to cover today after the presentation. However, I am really privileged to introduce the next speakers for today. They come from Monash Public Library Services, and we have with us today Jason Brack, the Library Community Engagement Coordinator, and Nilupa Mahanama, the Senior Coordinator for Libraries. And they're joining us to speak today about on their presentation, Libraries Under Attack. So enough from me. Jason and Nilupa, are you ready to go?
Yep, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen.
Over to Jason.
Can someone just give me a thumbs up that you can see that?
All good to go, Jason.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Ramona, for the opportunity to speak to you today. And we join you on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people here in Melbourne. So we gave this heading Libraries Under Attack because we were quite literally, I would say, in the first half of 2023 under siege, both for programming and then later in terms of book collections, and that's a challenge that's still happening to this day, and we'll come back to that. In terms of what we're covering, so we're just going to have a look at the origins behind the programming, why the drag story time, what the responses and the challenges that we faced during that time, those outcomes and key learnings. Then Nilupa's going to have a look at the book challenges that also have come up in the last couple of years, and then where we're headed into the future. So in terms of who we are, so Monash Public Library Service located in Melbourne. We've got 6 library branches located across the city. So Clayton, Glen Waverley, Mount Waverley, a small service point at Mulgrave, Oakley, Wheelers Hill, and we'll be very shortly launching a very small pop-up library in a neighbourhood house in Ashwood. So a lot of our programming is driven by the City of Monash Health and Wellbeing Plan 2021 to 2025. And one of the key themes in that particular plan is the theme of being inclusive for all, with a priority for LGBTIQA+ inclusion. In terms of our collection size, so you can see we've got just under 2,500 items within that collection. Those, I should stress, are items that come with an LGBTI+ series entry, so the number could be much higher. So in terms of our overall collection, we've got around 20,000 items, which doesn't, I don't think, includes the digital component. And we had, from January to June this year, we had nearly 3,500 loans for those particular items. So we support the community, the Rainbow community, through our inclusive programs and events, and as well as these library collections. So I want to first acknowledge a resource, the Rainbow Families Toolkit, which I'm going to come back to a bit later, but it's provided some of the information I'm able to share with you this morning. So Victorian Public Libraries have always taken pride in serving all members of their communities. This includes those who are marginalised, vulnerable or vilified. We have a focus on diversity and inclusion, and we constantly strive to meet the ever-changing community needs. However, sometimes our aims to achieve these goals will be challenged. In the 2021 census, the number of LGBTI+ identifying same-sex couples living together with children was more than triple the number reported 10 years previously. Over the past couple of years, there have sadly been the increase in homophobia and transphobia that has become focused on public libraries and certain programming aimed at rainbow families. The first half of 2023 was particularly challenging, and especially for us here at Monash Libraries. In 2020, Monash Libraries planned for its very first Rainbow Storytime as a special event to mark Ida Hobbit Day, which is always on the 17th of May. The COVID lockdowns came up, so we were forced to pivot our programming into the digital platform. So we were undeterred that we were going to continue with doing the Rainbow Storytime, but it was going to be in a different format than we had originally envisaged.
It smells pretty bad in there, so I'm going to head back. Yeah.
Keep going. So our first two Rainbow Storytimes actually both ended up taking place in a digital format. So we were given copyright exemptions at that time, as were all public libraries, that we could record stories and put them up online for people to enjoy from home. So we did the Ida Hobbit Storytime, which was placed online on our library YouTube channel. And then in the August of that year, we did a second recording, which was for Wear It Purple Day, which is always held on the last Friday in August. So following those, once we did go back to normal, we did run Rainbow Storytimes in person. And I should say at that note that we never had any issues or faced any challenges. So for us, the next step to take was to look at doing a drag story time, which we had seen other public libraries doing, both in Australia and overseas, and they've been happening since, I think, launched in the United States around 2015. So we raised the proposal with the council's newly formed LGBTIQI+ working group, almost a year before the actual event date that we had scheduled. We also discussed the plans for the drag story time at the library's internal leadership team meeting. So there was ongoing dialogues in these meetings as things would start to take shape. So one of my colleagues, who's also a member of the working group, knew of a performer called Samuel Thompson, who had expressed interest in participating in the program. I contacted Sam and they immediately said yes. In January of 2023, myself and my colleague Lisa, who was the Youth Services Librarian at Oakley, where we planned to run the drag story time, attended a drag story time at Moonee Valley Libraries, which Nilupa very kindly organised for us. This gave us the opportunity to see the event in action and to talk to the staff on the ground. Although they had received some community backlash, on the day itself, everything went to schedule. I also felt reassurance on the day because after talking to the children's librarian later, she was aware of Sam T and she spoke very highly of their work. So the model that we chose to use for the drag storytime at Monash was going to follow the same format as Moonee Valley Libraries. The lead for the event was always going to be the Youth Services Librarian, Lisa, with the drag queen assisting with some of the stories and songs. The event would end with a craft activity, which was going to be a colouring in sheet of a rainbow. We found, though, going later that other events and issues came up, and the fact that the program was predominantly driven by the experienced youth librarian became overshadowed as events continued to unfold. So why would we want to do a drag story time? So at their core, drag story times are simply a performance that introduces children to diverse role models and encourages acceptance, love, and respect for people in the rainbow community. They can incorporate many elements that young children and families love: colour, celebration, stories, and song. They create a connection between libraries and local rainbow families, which is of course important, but they can also attract a significantly wider audience. And you will find at these events many allies and their children being in the audience as well. Performances like drag story times can support patrons of all ages to engage with the library and celebrate literacy in new ways. So the first active promotion of the drag story time took place on the Active Monash Pride Night, which is one of the local aquatic centres, on Sunday, the 25th of March, 2023. So we promoted both the poster and the event featured on the cover. It's a bit hard to see in this image of our latest What's On programs booklet. This particular event that night also marked the launch of the City of Monash's new LGBTO+ action plan, which I will come back to later. The image on the poster was provided by Sam and was intended to be marketed both at the event at Oakley and as well as in our library branches. Unfortunately, a day or two prior to that event, word had gotten out on social media about what we were doing. I received an email from Nilupa with the two grim words, "It started." By the Friday morning, Oakley Library staff were already receiving multiple phone calls from the public wanting to speak to the event organisers, that being myself and Lisa. As Lisa was on leave, I found myself having to call back some of these people until our names were taken off the booking system which we use, which for this particular event was Try Booking. So some of the challenges that we faced: abusive phone calls, emails to library and to council, manipulation of our booking system, online petitions, social media posts, and contact with our local MPs. In relation to the phone calls, Oakley Library was receiving around 60 to 70 phone calls a day from members of the public to complain about the event. And that became particularly challenging for the staff working in the branch, who I know from talking to many of them over that time, became quite fearful to even pick up the telephone because they didn't know what they were going to get on the other end of the phone. The manipulation of the booking system, we used a booking system that didn't require any sort of validation in terms of a library card number. So we sat down one day and we went through the bookings because the event had booked out very quickly, and we found quite a majority at that time were bogus bookings, and they were easily identified by the types of email addresses or the names of the people that had registered for the event. Social media posts, I'll come back to later. The change.org position. So there was a petition launched on change.org to cancel the drag story time, which was taken down in about 24 hours. About the same time, a Save the Drag Queen petition was also launched on change.org, and by the time that finished, it had over 4,000 supporters. So although there was support out there for the event, that seemed to be constantly overshadowed by the negativity. With the emails, what happened very early in the piece, and this is my own personal reflection, was that I had been contacted to call back one of the people that was complaining. I wasn't able to reach that person on the phone, so I thought I would send an email to them with our standard response that we had prepared. She later called me back and I spoke to her on the phone, and that phone call sort of ended in a civil way with the lady saying that she would leave it at that. She did take things much further, and it was probably about 4 or so weeks into the situation. I came into work one day and sat down at my emails, and my work inbox was flooded with about 20 emails. So we found out later that that particular person had shared my work email on social media and my work telephone number here at Glen Waverley Library. So I was in the position of having to ask the branch staff to screen any of the phone calls that were coming through to me. I made the conscious decision eventually not to read the emails that were coming through because the majority of them were quite unpleasant. I don't need to go into any more further examples. I did get some positive emails, but for the most part, they were quite negative with quite a lot of personal attacks as well. I'm just going to hand over to Nilupa just to talk about our responses to what was happening. Thanks, Nilupa.
Thanks, Jason. So yes, like Jason was saying, as soon as the calls started, we provided our staff with guided responses. Soon we realized the same people were calling multiple council contact numbers. So we started maintaining a call log. For front of house staff, the advice was to keep the discussion to minimum, and any escalation calls will be returned by senior staff. our CEO directors were returning some of the most challenging calls. Initially, the calls were localized, but soon we started getting organized calls from interstate and in some cases overseas. Council as well as SAMT were being frequently approached by various media platforms to talk about what was happening, which included radio shows on 3AW, ABC Radio Melbourne. There were also stories in the major newspapers and on platforms such as Sky News. As a local council, we were not prepared to the level of response that was required. We have a customer service guarantee internally that we endeavor to return all calls within a set time frame and similar. At the time, we didn't have a mechanism to take the phones offline or redirect except to our other library branches. However, it needs to be noted at the library branches itself, except for the phone calls, the atmosphere was different. People who were actually coming into the branch, the local community, were supportive and sympathetic to what was happening. We received support and care from local level, but it was getting very overwhelming. While all this is happening, the library team was in constant contact with SAMT, providing them with support too. As the story time date got closer, it got to a point where personal contact details of council staff, as Jace mentioned, was getting published online. Organized directed campaigns to flood inboxes, flood phone lines with harassment calls were increasing. Death threats being made to staff, councillors, and their families. These were getting escalated to the local police. By this time, all our branches had increased security presence, and things were escalating. However, we were not alone in what was happening. Jess will tell you more on a similar situation that was happening elsewhere in Australia.
Thanks, Nilupa. So we were definitely not alone. So this was a protest against the Drag Queen Story Hour at Manly Libraries in New South Wales, being drowned out by a large, colourful and peaceful counter-protest in February last year. However, their library was completely closed an hour ahead of the event following a bomb threat made against organisers. They liaised with police over the most appropriate response and chose not to publicise the threat until after the event. The information, which included a claim of a bomb planted at the library to kill all pedophiles, had been provided to police to investigate. And even this year, the ABC was forced to scrap a drag queen storytime session for children as young as 3 after the event sparked a hateful response. The national broadcaster planned to hold a 4-hour event in Rockdale Library in Sydney's south in February this year in the lead up to the annual Mardi Gras celebrations. The event, which would have involved drag performers reading books to children, sparked outrage from locals and groups questioning whether the session was appropriate. And we saw that things were happening right around Australia, here in Victoria and even overseas. This is one of the images that was posted online by Andrew Bogut in relation to what happened. So key influencers were voicing their objections to the event, including Andrew Bogut, the former basketballer. And it's fair to say that we had gone through a couple of weeks of quite heated phone calls, etc. Things did start to die down for a while. And then he came on the scene and put a post on Twitter. And he has 20,000 followers. So we suddenly seemed to see that things were starting to ramp up again in a very unpleasant way. So you can see the post here. A public library in Melbourne is holding a drag queen story hour for children aged 1 to 6 years. This man wants to perform for babies who can't even walk and talk yet. It's not equality and diversity. We know exactly what it is, the woman tweeted. Many who replied to Bogart's tweet supported his stance. I don't know whether to be more shocked that it's happening or that it's sold out, a woman replied. Another added, suburban mums are dragging their kids along to this just so they can post a couple of photos on their socials and show everyone they know how edgy and enlightened we are. It's disgusting, but also pathetic. But one person also replied, not sure what the issue is. We were also facing at that time as well, and this is before the council meeting, challenges around what particular books had we selected to read for the story time. And I can assure you that the books that were chosen were definitely age-appropriate material. So the council meeting in April 2023. So there was an estimated 190 protesters against the event who attended the council chambers on Springvale Road in Glen Waverley, with council on the night engaging extra security and Victoria Police for support. Amongst the higher profile attendees advocating for cancellation of the event was the United Australia Party Senator Ralph Babet and Avi Yamini. Other key groups such as My Place and Reunite Democracy Australia rallied supporters to descend on the meeting. The newly formed group Voice for Kids also nominated the council meeting as its first main event with the statement, "We will send a clear message to Monash councillors that drag queen shows are not appropriate for children." Glen Waverley Library, located right next door to the Civic Centre, was closed early on the day of the council meeting to avoid any potential issues with protesters entering the library. After much debate as to whether or not to proceed with the meeting, it started around 7:15 that night, but was forced to be suspended for another hour when protesters repeatedly labelled councillors as pedophiles and called for their sacking for promoting sex in front of children. The story time wasn't even an official item on the council agenda, yet they had received 30 questions that had been submitted in advance of the public question time at the meeting. In support of the event, there was around 30 counter-protesters protected by police in the main atrium of the Civic Centre. In the days prior to the council meeting, Burundara City Council here in Melbourne had been forced to cancel a drag story time over threats of violence and antisocial behaviour. Casey Council had also just cancelled a series of drag performances, and a local cafe in Chelsea had to call off a children's craft and games event hosted by drag queens after being concerned about safety. At that point, cancellation at Monash was still not considered an option. The decision was then made to relocate the event to another venue, which was going to be the Clayton Community Centre. And the change of location would only be communicated to those who had registered for the event a day or two prior. And we also made the decision at that time to not inform Sam T directly, but we would wait until closer to the event. Upon the continuation of threats, we then decided to move the event online using the Zoom platform. White supremacist Thomas Sewell then added his voice to the protest and was vowing to crash the event with neo-Nazi protests and threats of violence. A day or two later, the CEO of the City of Monash made the difficult decision that, due to the threats of violence to staff and to the public, the event would have to be cancelled. Before the cancellation was officially announced, I needed to call both Sam T and Lisa to advise them of this difficult decision. An announcement was made to all library and council staff around midday before the official announcement was made public. I'm going to read part of the statement that the CEO, Dr. Andy Diamond, released when the story time was cancelled. This event has attracted significant attention with hateful and threatening commentary and misinformation spread online via email and directly over the phone. It is incredibly disappointing that to have to cancel an event designed to celebrate the International Day against homophobia, biphobia and transphobia, but we were left with no choice after being advised of the risks associated with holding the event. Councillors and staff have received messages that nobody should be expected to receive in their workplace, as have our LGBTI+ community. In recent days, these threats have escalated to direct threats of violence involving the event itself. Our Drag Story Time event was designed to introduce children to diverse role models and encourage acceptance, love and respect. It's so disappointing that some people have a long way to go before this is achieved. We understand that this was not for everyone, and scheduling it outside our regular library program so that parents planning to bring their children could make the deliberate choice to attend. Unfortunately, some in the community were not willing to allow that choice. In the end, we were unable to guarantee that we would be able to hold the event safely. We apologise to our LGBTI+ community for this outcome. I hope that they understand we did not make this decision lightly, and we share their disappointment. Council remains committed to delivering on the outcomes of goals in the recently endorsed action plan. So this is an event that you might recall took place not long after, and this is actually Sam T, who's performing a drag story time at Parliament House. We did quite a bit of reflection, I think, on what happened, and part of that reflection, there were a lot of what ifs. You know, should we have called the event by a different name, not use the word drag story time? I think we were wanting to be clear right from the very start that it was a drag story time, because we didn't want to risk, say, calling it a rainbow story time and potentially upsetting somebody who came to find that there was a drag queen in attendance. We supported the staff. The staff particularly were quite affected by this, and I would say especially the Oakley staff, who were bearing the brunt of those repeated phone calls for that extended period of time. And a lot of people did, I think, probably walk away feeling that, you know, it was all for nothing, but it had always been said right from the very start that safety had to win out over all else. But we're resolved to continue with our rainbow programming and collections. So there was much media coverage of the event, with the drag story time in Parliament, even attracting cartoon commentary such as this one that appeared in the Herald Sun in May 2023, which was then tied in with the upcoming then budget address. I'm just going to share with you a case study of something similar that happened at Goulburn Valley Libraries, but it mirrors very much what happened to us. So Goulburn Valley Libraries had run drag storytime events for over a number of years and can attest to the planning and running these events has changed with the social climate. Their first event took place in 2019, featuring drag queen Frock Hudson. In the first year, advertising went ahead to the usual process: website, social media, and flyers and posters in the library. They were unsure about how the event would be received in the community, but there was no adverse community response. And although the crowd was small, it was deemed a successful event. The following year, they did it online due to the pandemic and received one negative email from a member of the public. In 2021, they had a combination of online and in-person story times, and in 2022, were able to hold a rainbow story time in person again, with a great attendance and very positive feedback from the community. By then, they had come to consider Rainbow Storytime as part of their annual programming. In 2023, a Rainbow Storytime was scheduled as per usual. Before there was any promotion on socials or any official communication from the corporation, a library staff member posted on the local community Facebook page that Frock was returning to the library. They were not prepared for the response that followed, which was both immediate and harsh. Staff were quickly subjected to negative phone calls and social media posts. They immediately went into risk management mode and started liaising with local and Melbourne Police, the Rainbow Community Angels, and the Goulburn Valley Pride to ensure that they could hold the event safely. All phone calls were put through to their operations manager and comments were removed from their website. A protest at Shepparton Library on the Sunday before the event led to the closure of the library for the day, but the libraries pressed ahead with their planning, hiring security guards to be at the library on the morning of the event. However, senior police advised the council that the event should be cancelled, and it was called off on the afternoon before the event. Staff were devastated, but the Rainbow Community Angels and Frock Hudson decided that they would still hold a story time on the lawns of the library. The library was used as a green room for the event, and pre-planned security measures were instituted on the day. Library staff were still fully invested in the event, and a good crowd came to hear Frock and to show their support. The risk management strategy was comprehensive and worked well for them. Following the event, debriefing sessions were held both internally and with the Angels. Importantly, they learnt that communication with staff is critical, as is visible support from management. The presence of the CEO and senior management at the Storytime event was held in front of the library, demonstrated to staff and to the LGBTO+ community that Goulburn Valley Libraries were still supported, despite having to cancel the event in the library. It's easy to forget that performers such as Frock Hudson and Sam T are reliant on these events going ahead for them, as this is an income stream. This particular image shows an event that took place across the road from the Oakley Library on the day of our planned drag story time. There were 3 drag queen performers who attended that event, and all 3 were ones that had recently had work cancelled due to the cancellations of the drag story times. So in terms of our risk mitigation strategies, the child safety is a critical consideration for us in planning and delivering these types of programs, and library management had active roles to undertake on-site while the programs delivered to ensure the physical and psychological safety of library staff and community members was prioritised. In the aftermath of what happened last year, a number of risk mitigation strategies were recommended to combat the growing wave of negativity. One of the key ones, I'll touch on a couple, was advertising, and was to market the event accordingly. So what we've done subsequent to the drag story time at Monash is we have minimised our posting. We don't post these events on our social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram, because those tended to be those platforms that generated the most negativity. We made that change from the Midsummer Festival this year. We also relied heavily on Council's communications team to monitor social media platforms for any negative comments. For the Wear a Purple Day story time in August last year, we only received 1 negative comment on social media, which didn't gain any traction. More comments came through in February, some of which actually came from the Rainbow community themselves, who objected to some of the wording that we used in our marketing. And that wording was in relation to, I think we used the word gently, which they questioned in their commentary. Looking at the booking system is something else to take into consideration. As I mentioned earlier, people were able to manipulate our booking system and to try and book out the event. So some libraries are now using booking systems that link the registration directly to the person's library card number, so that dummy bookings can't go through. And we have subsequently adopted a new booking management system that can do that. In the perceived event of protest or disruption, for our Rainbow story times in August last year and February this year, we did engage security guards to be present on the day. However, nothing happened, which goes back to something that Nilupa mentioned earlier, that a lot of the negativity and that actually comes from outside the actual council area. For the story times we held in May and then in August this year, I made the call not to engage security guards at all, and we just had some extra staff rostered on the day. We also gave staff the opportunity for these events, both when we were planning the drag story time and the Rainbow story times, but nobody felt comfortable working on the actual day at the library, that we would roster them out to another library branch as well. So since the drag story time last year, we've held 4 Rainbow story times across our Oakley and Glen Waverley libraries. To demonstrate our commitment to library program, Rainbow programming, from February 2025, our Rainbow story times will become on a monthly basis and will no longer be scheduled just to tie in with specific dates and events. In terms of our other LGBTI+ programming, we've been running a monthly Pride Book Club from our Mulgrove branch for 3 years now. We also regularly conduct author talks, film screenings. We've got a trivia night coming up in January, which will be promoted in the Midsummer booklet, and we do history presentations. We also showed our ongoing support to Sam T, and a number of staff attended one of his events in Fitzroy back in June last year. We presented Sam with a gift of some of the picture books that we were going to have read at the drag story time. And I'm now going to hand back to Nilupa to talk about the challenges that we faced in relation to our library collections. Thank you.
Thanks, James. So the focus for some of the challenges have shifted now to our collection from the programming. We have found increasing number of challenges aimed at our physical collection. So far, at least at City of Monash, we haven't received any for our digital collections. And when we are talking about our collections, we're talking 200,000 items in our physical collection and further 75,000 items in our digital collection. So a lot of these challenges have been managed locally. So some of these numbers that's listed here doesn't really reflect the true picture. So I want to draw attention to that. These numbers come from ALIA. I'll talk a little bit further about how we want to capture that data through ALIA to paint a true picture of what's happening. So many public libraries are facing challenges for their LGBTIQA+ books, particularly those for children and families. Often requests for removal comes from coordinated group efforts. For example, a member of public may present to the library with a list of titles they want to contest and that they found online. The titles may not even be in that specific library's collection, and the member of the public may not even be a member of that library or even live locally. Yeah, thank you. So ALIA has started a campaign to capture data on what is happening across Australia. These are the data that that campaign received in 2023. And it shows only one from Victoria, and we are aware multiple challenges that happened in Victoria, so it's not been reported as such yet. This campaign is called Freedom to Read Advocacy Campaign. Any challenges, libraries are encouraged to report through that campaign, and that is through the ALIA portal. You need the membership to actually log in, so misinformation would be less. And our message is that no library should be removing books from their collection on the basis of homophobic and or transphobic challenges. This would represent a potential breach of the Anti-Discrimination Act and contravene not only the collection management policies of individual libraries, but also the broader concept of free access to information and equitable service as outlined by the Australian Public Library Alliance and ALIA. The only people responsible for classifying publications in Australia is the Australian Classification Board. And if a person complains that a certain resource is classified as junior, then they need to complain to the ACB, not the library. So this is the message, this is the consistent message that we are using across public libraries so that we can manage these challenges a little bit easier. Chase, can we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. I'll read out a little bit about from the ALIA statement following the decision by the Cumberland Council in Sydney in recent times with that book ban issue that happened there. ALIA released a statement and it included following. Australian Library and Information Association is committed to libraries providing access to information for all. There is no place for censorship. People should be free to decide what books they borrow from their public library. People should also be able to find stories that represent their culture, their families, and their identities. This freedom of choice and access to information and stories that represent them is a fundamental pillar of democracy. And of course, Australia is not alone in confronting this phenomenon. And a number of resources have been developed by our partner organizations in New Zealand, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And as I was saying before, libraries can report complaints, harassment, or attempts to interfere with library collections to ALIA via the Freedom to Read advocacy campaign. Jace will take you through some of the local resources that's available to us. Jace, if you want to take it.
Thank you. So this is two internal council documents, or one's external and one's internal. So the City of Monash LGBTI+ Action Plan was endorsed by Council in late 2022 and launched in March last year, as I mentioned very at the start of the presentation. So the document aims to ensure the Council's strong commitment to LGBTI+ inclusion is built upon. The plan underwent extensive community feedback and consultation and provides a framework with clear actions to better understand and respond to the experiences and priorities of the rainbow communities in Monash. The plan focuses on increasing the visibility, social inclusion and health and wellbeing of the rainbow communities and ensures that our LGBTI+ communities are fully connected, supported and feel safe. The second document is an internal document which was prepared by the LGBTI+ working group, of which myself is one of the members, and that was released around halfway through this year as a crucial tool for fostering a supportive and inclusive environment for individuals who identify as LGBTI+. Drawing on Council's existing values, policies and procedures, the handbook equips staff with more knowledge of LGBTI+ issues and how they apply in our everyday roles and responsibilities. The Rainbow Families Toolkit was an initiative through Victoria, Public Libraries Victoria and the state government, and this was released about 2 or 3 months ago. So, and it was the cancellation of events such as the drag story times that was a key motivation for the creation of this particular toolkit. And I do say that this toolkit is an internal document only and is not available for viewing by the public. So cancellation is considered from the perspective of harm reduction, but the harm of the cancellation itself has often not been discussed. The cancelling of these events can send a number of messages to the community. In particular, it could tell rainbow families and other community members that they are not valued or celebrated, and it signals to protesters that their threats are effective. Cancellation can be, and as was the case with us in the issue of safety, the only option in some instances. And sometimes that decision to cancel may be beyond the library's control. For example, when staff are instructed to cancel by management or by council. Cancellation of an event should always be the last resort, but all factors should be considered when making that particular call. When the toolkit was released, it came out on a Friday and it did briefly feature in some media channels, the Herald Sun and Sky News in particular, who were challenging particular aspects of the booklet. And there were claims made that we were going to be asking children under 5 for their pronouns, and that's simply not the case. So there was quite a bit of miscommunication around this booklet. I'm going to end on this slide. So this was taken at the annual Pride March for Midsummer this year. So it just, I think, to me, it demonstrates library staff from across Victoria coming together with allies, with family members, friends to show their support for the LGBTI+ community. And the fight goes on and the work continues. So thank you. And we're happy to take any questions. Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you so much, Jason and Nilupa. I think the heart emoji has taken a workout on the chat. So much support and so much kind of empathy from our audience for today. I think we've gone a little bit over time. Unfortunately, we'll have no time to answer any questions, but thank you again for sharing your experience. I know it was challenging personally, but it was really well received by our audience, judging by the chat. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just over to my colleague now, Hannah, to talk about what's coming up next.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Jason and Nilupa, for sharing your work with us today. If you do have any further questions for the speakers today, you can send an email to members@caval.edu.au and the team will forward your questions. I would also like to thank my seminar committee colleagues for everything involved in organising and running the event. And as a sustainable thank you gift to our presenters, Caval have arranged for native trees to be planted through the organisation 15 Trees. The trees were recently planted by Nullivale Landcare Group on an island in Mollison Creek at Pyalong, Victoria. This was only the first session of this 3-part series, and we have plenty more to come. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. daylight time, Kat Kane and Naomi Nilupa David from Deakin University will speak about literacies, learning and inclusion before a panel discussion on information literacy through the lens of underserved groups. On Thursday at 10:30, we will be joined by Professor Bodil Rasmussen and Michelle Bendel, also from Deakin University, to explore guided self-determination. Then we will be treated to 5 lightning talks on the theme Empowerment Through Information Literacy. And don't forget about the CRIG seminar cake competition. Bake a cake that embodies the concept of information literacy through decoration, methodology, or general vibe. Send in a photo along with a short baker's statement explaining your cake to the members@caval.edu.au email address. Entries close at 4 p.m. tomorrow, and the winner will be revealed on Thursday by audience vote, so don't miss that. And there is an in-person get-together tomorrow at 6 p.m. at Captain Melville in the Melbourne CBD, and you can find the registration links and further information in the chat. And with that, we are now ending the webinar for today. Thank you everyone for attending. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow and on Thursday. Bye.